All right, well, welcome to Track E. I'm Carl Gerber, Chief Data Officer for Deloitte US, and I'll be your track producer. MIT CDOIQ Symposium continues to expand our global reach. We have an excellent lineup of sessions that bring us a world view for our Track E, the international track. This is session 5E. Managing data within the Defense Department requires political savviness, functional knowledge, and technical understanding. This panel will explore challenges and successes in managing data relative to organizational change, data strategy, and managing in an institution. This session is being recorded and replays will be made available after the symposium along with the slide materials. We will have a Q&A session, so please put your questions into the Q&A tab of the Wahoo application and vote up those questions that you would like to see answered. So next, let me introduce our panel moderator, Mark Krzysko, Principal Deputy Acquisition Data and Analytics of Enterprise Information Acquisition Analytics and Policy. He serves in ASD, AE, AD&A as the Principal Deputy Director and is in charge of enterprise information. In this senior leadership role, Mr. Krzysko directs acquisition, data governance, data access, and data science to enable the department to make sound business decisions with data. He is leading a philosophical and technology transformation within the department to make timely, authoritative acquisition information available to support insight and decision-making on the Department of Defense's major programs, a portfolio totaling approximately $2 trillion of investment funds over the life cycle of the programs, as well as smaller programs and non-traditional acquisition approaches. Mark, over to you to introduce your panel.
Carl, thank you very much. And thank you to the audience for joining us. I want to express a special thank you to Robert and Dr. Wang for hosting such a wonderful event. And I wish we were all there in person once again on the MIT campus in Boston or in Cambridge. But I would like to take the time to introduce a distinguished panel, not only panelists, but colleagues, people I work with on a weekly basis and have a profound role in changing the Department of Defense. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Robert Borka. He's the Director of Acquisition Policy and of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He oversees 180 programs in the Navy and the Marine Corps, and he monitors the processes associated with this. He also serves as a data steward and is a great colleague of mine. Mr. Borka serves as the liaison between us, RDA, and acquisition and sustainment. I'd also like to introduce Dr. William Parker, or Bill. He is the executive program faculty at the Defense Acquisition University. He joined DAU after serving 23 years in the Marine Corps and as a former Marine and working in the industry. He currently serves as executive program management faculty, and he has previously served as the director of functional learning directorate in the Defense Acquisition University. Finally, and last but not least, Mr. Greg Little. We are very honored to have Mr. Little to participate with us. Greg is the Deputy Comptroller for Enterprise Data and Business Performance in the Office of the Undersecretary of the Comptroller. He has a profound role. He serves as the advisor to the Undersecretary for the Comptroller, the Principal Staff Assistants, and the Deputy Secretary of Defense. In other words, Greg is always in the fire. He is responsible for advancing the National Defense Strategy by leading and championing the evolution of the department's performance management strategy, and collaborates with those of us across the department to use the data, evaluate the efforts, digital transformation, and improve the performance of the defense agencies and field activities. And I am very grateful for Greg, Robert, and Bill to be a part of this panel. To begin with, I've asked each of the panelists to prepare 5 to 10 minutes of remarks and begin the discussion so you have a better understanding of their role and their responsibilities, so we can facilitate some discussion. Robert, first over to you.
Hey, Mark, thank you very much. To my panel members, it's great to be with everybody today. Like you said, I'd love to be in person, everybody, but I'm glad we have the opportunity to discuss data, how we're managing data, and the importance of its use. Whether it's industry, government, in our own personal lives, data is so critical to a lot of things we do. In the Navy side, we have about 180 or so traditional acquisition programs, 25 or so we call accelerated acquisition programs, and an untold number of programs in sustainment, delivering and sustaining the warfighter's operations today. And we have challenges on the acquisition side. How do we become better stewards of our taxpayer dollars? Well, the data helps us to drive those decisions. Well, how are we doing on sustainment? The data is out there to help us drive on how we do sustainment and how we improve our reliability and availability of our assets. And the Navy is really trying to get after that and changing the way of just requests for many programs for information, wasting a lot of time getting data that means different stuff. We've been working very closely with our service sisters in the Air Force and the Army on making sure that when we say X means X, we all say X means X, and we understand what this data means. One of the things that we've been doing around the Navy is we've set up, we've established our CDO in the Navy and established our data governance board. We've set up 13 data stewards. One of those data stewards is under the area of acquisition, which I support under the data. I support the data steward for acquisition. And we're trying to streamline our data to make sure that we know what it means, that it's quality data, that we get our information from multiple systems into places where we can do analytics with it. We can leverage acquisition data, sustainment data, financial and fiscal data, people data, and start building trends and analysis to help us figure out where to put efforts and how to drive decisions in what we're doing. It's great that we've taken this journey over the last 2 to 3 years to really get at where our data is, the challenges to getting to that data, and how to actually start taking it and turning it into something that means we can show leadership what it means. But that's only part of the equation. That's happening at the broader, bigger level. At the end state, we still have to get our people to understand what the data means to them. When you're looking at data, it's, we have to teach our people that even in the trenches, how to take data and make it help them drive decisions within their program offices or in the field activities or on the ships, in the submarines and the squadrons. How readiness data can help them make better decisions to get an aircraft up and running. Maybe they need to go ahead and share information in a certain way that helps drive our supply chain readiness better. The other part of it is it's not only about training our people about what the data means to them, but it's to start asking the different questions. When you start asking the strategic questions, the so what's, then that starts asking you, okay, I asked the so what. Well, what's the data that I need to answer the so what? Okay, I have that. I have the knowledge of what data I need to answer the question. Where is the data? All right, we found where the data is at. Is it usable? Does it have meaning? Does it have governance and definition? We have been taking those iterative to get all levels, especially in the acquisition side, really to understand their data and where they're going. So it's been a journey. It's been a challenge, but I will say it's been impressive to watch our enterprise really take this on collectively in partnerships with our other services with OSD, and also looking at industry and how industry is doing best practices. So that's some opening remarks. But Mark, it's been again a pleasure working with you. Pleasure working with Greg and on the efforts that OSD is doing and Bill for working with you guys in DAU on how we can better equip our workforce.
Robert, thank you very much. I mean, you are a tremendous colleague. The partnership with the Navy and the Secretariat Office and OSD, I'm just very grateful for having shipmates like you to work through that. One of the things that you talked about was, the workforce. And let's transition over to Dr. Bill Parker from a DAU perspective, who's on the cutting edge or the tactical edge of dealing with that workforce. Bill, over to you, please.
Thanks, Mark. I'd like to first start by thanking publicly my colleagues, Mark, Greg, and Robert. I've for years now sat quietly alongside them and watched them build the appropriate data we need in the department to start doing proper analytics and start transitioning to predictive statistics to really help our men and women in uniform. That's personal to me. I always bring this picture behind me. It's my son with his fellow Marines in Afghanistan. I have another son who's reporting to the USS Ron Reagan to be their chief surgeon. And whether we're talking about medical equipment, the ship he'll be sailing on, or this, we have to equip them the best we can while being good stewards of the taxpayers' dollar. And what my role has been is watching them build the data and figuring out what type of training do we need to bring to the workforce in order to capitalize on the data repositories they've built. And if you noticed, the intro talked about political savvy and technical skill. And we're really approaching training at two levels. I'm personally working with a lot of the executives on executive training for their understanding and political savvy, because if they don't have that, a lot of this hard work will go to waste, quite frankly. I have to bring them, and we as a team at DAU have to bring them from the old inferential statistics, where they used to have the skepticism around the small sample and all those rules, to really the power of predictive statistics and machine learning with these very large data sets. We also have to educate the executives and the senior leaders to understand what is data science. And that just because you have data and a nice little display tool like Click or Tableau doesn't mean you've really got to AI. How do you select the right vendors who are telling you they have AI to sell you to make sure you're getting a quality product? And how do we build the workforce with all these technical skills? How do you select the right team members? The second part of our training focus is at that data workforce, acquisition workforce level, where we're partnering with a lot of universities, places like George Mason University, Boston University, University of Virginia, Johns Hopkins, to bring in actual long courses where we teach machine learning. We teach them how to use some of the tools of the trade like R, Python, to really start analyzing the data that we've been able to collect through the efforts of my colleagues. We're also doing courses on Coursera, where we can give them everything from a data analytics certificate to give that leadership understanding to the nuts and bolts technical training that we have to provide, and build that understanding of the entire data team it requires to enhance decision making, to make sure we put the assets, the financial assets, the manpower where it's needed to, quite frankly, get this equipment to the men and women in uniform faster and at a better cost point. And that's what we're here to help with. And I'm really excited about the leaps we're making. I was just sitting in a course yesterday where students were starting to work with R and realize how much they could do to improve the data, quite frankly. And that's what I have, Mark.
All right, thank you. Bill, thank you for your service. thanks your sons for their service, both on the ship and the Marine Corps. I always have a soft spot. My dad was a former Marine serving in Korea in World War II. So always have the connection there. Last, but certainly not least, a great colleague of all of ours who, as I said, has a very difficult job working in the comptroller's office and feeding the executive analytics for all of the department, and where some of us, including me, represent a bit part piece, but a great partner in making that. And he's had a distinguished career and has done just a bang up job, both in acquisition, and I would also say in the COVID response and helping the department chart and use that data for us in the department. So Greg, over to you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, appreciate that, Marcus. A few things before I get started. One, I know it looks like I'm presenting from a hostage situation with the black background, so I want everyone to know that I'm safe and sound. The second is I recognize that's a little irony in me using some PowerPoint in a data conference, and so I recognize that irony, but I want to illustrate a story. And the third is I'm so excited to be here because you are all my people. The panelists are my folks with Robert, Bill, and Mark. We all know the value of data, but we all know how difficult it is to be able to realize the power of data analytics and data management and translate that into business value. For us in financial management, we're really going through this transition from scorekeeper to value add strategic business partner. And data management and analytics are just key enablers in us realizing that vision. And so what I wanted to do today was to sort of bring you through a day in the life story of a data product we actually developed here in OSD that actually led to our enterprise data management analytics environment that we run in OSD being created, called Advana, which stands for Advancing Analytics. All the folks on this panel have been big contributors to that. We bug Robert all the time to be able to give us data, and he always does it pretty willingly most of the time. And so what I wanted to be able to, the reason I want to tell a story is it embodies a lot of the things that you heard Robert and Bill and Mark talk about. And so the first thing that I think we did pretty well here is one of the things I think we always miss the point on in a data strategy is our data strategies often become technology strategies. And Bill alluded to this. One of the things I think we did okay within Comptrol and our CFO shop in DoD is that we started with the business strategy, and that drove our data strategy. And for us, the way we think of our financial managers of the future is that they'll ultimately wear two hats. One hat is still very traditional in nature, where we're caring about transactional processing, our budgetary resource management, compliance, and controls. But what we want to evolve into is, as we digitize, as we become more savvy with data management and analytics, is to wear our second hat, where we become more of that strategic value-added business partner, one in which we're able to link our financial data with other lines of business data like acquisition, IT, real property, do things like category management. How do we understand the different price points across the department for licensing and other types of things, and making sure we're getting the best deal? Ultimately, what we want to be able to do is link our financial data with other lines of business data with our mission data to help achieve the outcomes that are laid out in our national defense strategy. And so an example of that is we're doing some really interesting work in the department in our special forces areas, where they're using imaging, looking for indications and warnings. So how do we look at other countries and looking at patterns and seeing where there might be outliers? And then if we see an indication and warning that we might need to respond, how do we come up with courses of action on that response? And then if you think about those course of action, they have a supply component. Do I have the right amount of munitions? Do I have the right amount of tanks? Do I have the right amount of aircraft? As Robert mentioned, are they maintained? Are they available? And then what's the financial impact of that? And how do we make sure that we're doing things in a cost-effective way, but have the materials and the goods available to be able to carry out that mission? So I think we've done okay in DoD about actually making the data strategy relate to the business, not just the technology. Now, obviously, data is a key enabler here, and this is why I wanted to share this story. And just to give a little bit of background, The DoD is one of the only federal agencies that's not got a clean audit opinion. And in order to get a clean audit opinion, you have to do something called the universe of transactions, which is, can I reconcile the balances on our financial statements, think like a balance sheet, to the transactional details that are created in our accounting systems? We have 28 accounting systems. And then can I relate that data back to the transactional details in our contracting systems, our inventory, and our payroll, so on and so forth. So a pretty big, hairy problem. And so 4 years ago, when I knew nothing, we had really our infancy of data management. I was tasked with this universe of transactions, which is a pretty hairy data problem. At the time, I knew nothing. And this auditor with this green visor comes into my office and says, hey, Greg, for our defense health program, for this statement, financial statement, for this line, which is an outlay line, I think accounts payable, can you give me all of the transactional details and tell me that amount? And the reason why I want to tell you this story is we learned a lot from this, and it's going to highlight a lot of what Rob and Bill talked about, but I think everyone can relate to a similar question. Here's the good news. We actually started with a question and a problem and using data to solve it. Oftentimes, I'm seeing people say, hey, what data do you have? And then I'll figure out my question. And what Robert alluded to, coming up with really good questions is really a key part of making sure that data turns into value. So let's sort of start our story here. This was 4 years ago when I knew nothing. I was trying to be the savior of DoD. And so my first thing was I wanted to find the financial statement. So I found the financial statement in our financial reporting system. I found the right line, that outlay line on the balance sheet. I'm feeling really good about myself. I'm going to be the savior of DoD for audit. Like I'm going to be a 7-star general and just achieve this type of monumentous thing. And then what I find out is I ask the basic question all of us in the data management community is like, what is this data made up of? And this is when the story turns to one of just horror and sadness, where I find out that you have these JVs, you have these crosswalks, because we have no standard data in the Department of Defense. You have these accounting systems, you have these feeder systems like your contracts and your payroll. We have these shadow systems, the access databases that Jenny Sue and John Doe run that no one knows about, but seem to run your organization more than the ERPs that you might have paid for. And so the first thing I do on this journey, because remember, Robert at the time wasn't around as a data steward, I needed to find out what was the inventory of my systems. And so the first thing that would have been really nice to have 4 years ago would have been a data catalog that had a data dictionary and assets and data stewards and POCs attached to them. But I had none of that. So I did what any good person would do at the time, is to just phone friends. And so I found out just for this one outlay financial statement line, I had 9 feeder systems. These are all accounts payable. And I want to just highlight something that MIT actually wrote a few years ago. That system MoCast that you see on the screen is actually the oldest system on Earth that's still operating. And so that's an achievement that we have in DoD. And so then I find out that we have 6 accounting systems that support this. Some of these were built in the 70s, which is pretty horrifying since I was born in 1985. And then I find out we have all these shadow systems that make up these lines. These access databases don't have good controls. Data is not standard. And then it goes through all of these crosswalks to make standard. And then we finally get to the financial statement. But of course, none of these business rules are documented, right? These Rosetta Stones that turn non-standard data into standard data so our analysts can use them. And so I'm at this point and I'm realizing, the power of a data catalog and the power of machine readable business rules. And I'm thinking to myself, we got to get to that at some point. And we actually have through a lot of our efforts that we've been working on. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But then I had to do something in order to get the data that everyone hates in the Pentagon. I think everyone hates when the ivory tower of headquarters does this. And it's called the dreaded data call, right? I mean, we're data people. We should be automating things. But it was a dreaded data call. And I had no technology at the time. And so everyone looks like this, right? Everyone's super sad that I am sending out this data call, but I don't know how to connect. We have no open data architecture. I don't know what can be an API, an ODBC connection. I don't know what can be through an SFTP server. Should it be batch, should be real time. So I finally convinced everyone through beers and favors and drug deals to get me the data. And then all of a sudden the data is coming in, right? And again, I don't have much technology at this point, but the data is flowing into me. And it's flowing into me in XML and JSON and CSV. And at the time, 4 years ago, like the most complicated thing, we had no cloud, we had no schemaless architecture. It was all like relational databases, right? And at that time, I only had a laptop, and it was a government laptop. And so things like fuming, and there's like, memory issues and just like craziness. And this is only 37 million transactions. Just to put that in perspective, in the platform I run now, we're at 25 billion and I barely started. And so this was a really hard journey. And so we had to think through some lessons learned here. And then also, while I was getting the data issue, I was getting cultural resistance, right? Like, I don't want to give OSD my data. They're going to do crazy things with it where I work, or you don't understand the data. And so one thing that was interesting that got through us a lot of cultural issues was actually being in the audit and being under compliance versus innovation. Compliance is something everyone kind of accepts. It's non-scary. You have to do it year in and year out. And so we were able to start creating this cross-functional, cross-organizational, breaking data silos through compliance, which was actually, I think, a really interesting area of success for us that I don't think I appreciated until the last couple of years. And so what we had to do is sort of think of things differently. We had to be able to catalog our data sources, have the right metadata and context of that, have people like Robert, who are incredible data stewards, to bring that together. We had to bring that data into the platform, and we had to use cloud technologies that would be able to scale along with us. We had to use new technologies that allowed us to more extract, load, and transform. So we didn't have to build everything in a relational type of way, and we could just get the data with whatever format the systems had it in and not have to wait for system change requests or resourcing. And then we've been producing some interesting analytics. And so audit, if you think of the principles of audit, of good data management, completeness of data, accuracy of data, timeliness of data, authoritative data sources, that's all the things you want in your data management and analytics environment to start trusting the data. And we've been able to do some really interesting things as we sort of hit in the area of compliance. When things like COVID-19 came into play, we already had a lot of this cross-functional data. We had supply data, we had medical data, we had financial data that allowed us to be able to see the power of a common operating picture and how data led to responses. Mark alluded to some of the things that we're doing with the Deputy Secretary on running the Department of Defense. If you're running the Department of Defense, you want to be able to see how you're doing in the areas of logistics and acquisition and personnel. But what we all know is that those data silos by themselves don't tell you the whole story. That second, third order effect of the business question. And so I think we all share a lot of the common challenges. We sort of banded together in sort of this support group to be able to start seeing the value of data. And I'll end with just three other thoughts that I want to echo with my colleagues. One is governance. And so there's two parts of governance. One is getting the right governance bodies to actually use data, because the more you use data and get the right questions, the better the data becomes and the more data acumen that organization is going to have in maturity. The other is in DoD. If you think of DoD, we do things from running a grocery store to running a media organization with defense media activity to running a school district to doing what the Navy does. And so there's endless number of use cases. How do you prioritize that endless use cases? How do you make sure you're looking at the right impact to level of effort, and you're making sure that you're getting that value that Robert and Bill and Mark talked about? The other one was around security. We're aggregating a lot of data for the first time ever, and a lot of our processes have not adapted to that. So how do we make sure we're getting the power of analytics? We're democratizing that, but we put the right security procedures in place. And this is something that we think a lot about. People, the right skill sets are so important. Our area that we need the most is around data engineers. The non-sexy data work, like the blue collar work of data, is really where we see most of the work occurring, just to be able to do business intelligence. I mean, where we're on the journey is, what does the DoD have, where is it, and what's the condition? That's where we are. Predictive is awesome, but you have to set up the foundation. And then the last thing I'll end with is, we've been starting to really think of data products, where we're making sure we understand the persona, the question, the data model, the impact statement. Because what we always want to make sure of is we're not doing data for data's sake, we're not doing for technology's sake. We're making sure we're adding business value. And people like Mark, Robert, Bill are just doing tremendous work in this area. And I just can't tell you how much they've helped the enterprise and how much they're helping their organizations. And so with that, Mark, I'll turn it over to you, but really appreciate you allowing me to be part of this panel.
Oh, thank you, Greg. Carl, I'll give you a warning here to tee up a couple questions as I kind of segue into the question and answer piece here. For those of you who don't know, I mean, thematically, I can't think of a bigger, more complex institution in the universe beyond the Department of Defense. And those of you who are familiar or not, we have varying degrees of statutory authority that sometimes create silos amongst us. You know, the CFO has statutory authorities associated with them, acquisition community. We're separated from the services. The complexity of making data work and sing across the institution is profoundly hard. And we also find ourselves in various balancing points, both transparency juxtaposed with security of the data, because we fall under the umbrella of serving the nation and protecting the nation. But there are, as Greg alluded to, a lot of mission areas in there. And how do we balance flexibility with straight line accounting authorities associated with that? All these things are in play every moment of our lives and working. And I think this is why this panel was assembled the way it is. It is about our collaboration, because that's the only way success can be found. We can have varying priorities, but finding ourselves in a core of data governance and management is remarkably profound in a complex organization. Carl, do you have any questions for us from the audience?
Yes, I have a few audience questions teed up. But first, I'd like to thank and recognize you, Mark, Robert, Bill, and Greg. You take me back to the beginning of my journey with data. I was an Air Force captain gathering and developing the first systems to get readiness data and warfighting KPIs, and remembering how we first had to install the networks before we could even begin to gather the data. So thank you for taking me back to that. The first question was, how do you define a complex government organization? And Mark, you just did that. And Greg, your presentation showing the complexity of the systems and how things don't foot and tie. Is there anything else you would add, maybe from a different lens or a different perspective, that would define the complexity that you deal with every day and are moving things forward?
So Carl, I can start with that, because I know we deal with that a lot where we sit in the OSD. So just to give you guys a sense of just technology, culture, and maybe process, we have 1,801 business systems within the Department of Defense right now. Some of those ranging from the most modern systems in the world to some of the most archaic and vulnerable. And so being able to connect with those, understanding your landscape has been pretty challenging. In terms of the governance structures, as Mark alluded to, you have certain authorities that allow your organization certain flexibility. That can be really good, and it can be really hard to be able to get an enterprise picture of all your particular business units. And then there's a governance component to this. I mean, we have a major appetite for data. How do you be able to prioritize that? At the DoD level alone, I think we have something like 15 to 20 governance groups focusing on ranges from climate and how that impacts our readiness, global warming, to people, where we're making sure that we're looking at and preventing sexual assault, suicide prevention, to how we handle our grocery business, to how do we just manage the logistics and supply chain. So it's just a vast organization with something like 3 million total people. I think we're the size of the 4 Fortune 500 companies combined, something like that in terms of assets. We have about $2.6 trillion in assets. And so it's just a complex organization of when to focus. And I think one thing Robert and Bill and Mark have done a really good job is that the solution can't be that same level of complexity, meaning that if you just do a little bit at a time, eventually you make a lot of progress. And I think our panelists have done an incredible job at just getting a little bit of chunks and getting some wins, and then wins turn into more wins.
Robert, I'm going to call on you because the Navy is actually institutionally a rather complex organization beyond the systems of having the syscoms and all the components associated with the Navy. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Navy, just from I'm just going to just break it down just to acquisition and sustainment. We have 15 or so with numerous amount of program managers and program offices in there. They all see things in different ways in the acquisition world. They all, whether it's aviation, shipbuilding, C4I, combat systems, unmanned systems, business systems, you name it. We have several 100,000 people working in the acquisition domain in the Navy alone that all are touching and impacting data, whether they realize it or not. If you go look at our shipbuilding industrial base, we have suppliers supporting our industrial base in all 50 states. We have well over 1,000 suppliers out there that supply us parts. That's at the main tier. Getting an understanding of your supplier base, whether your DoD or an industry, is so critical to ensuring your success in operations, and that's just in the shipbuilding side. There's the aviation side, and there's the C5I and Intel side. You start expanding that across working collaboratively with the Air Force and the other services. It just gets complex very, very fast for us.
Bill, do you have a perspective?
Yes,
Thank
I would add to what my colleague said is that when you talk about our data, right, I think that we talked about over 1,000 systems. That doesn't include our 300,000 industry partners. And they're just the traditional industry partners that do business with us all the time. And we have to share some of our data with them, and all the way down 6 to 10 levels of a supply chain. And we have the additional challenge of trying to secure and protect that data. It gets very, very complex. Just my training requirements for our workforce, we have 180,000 people across 14 different disciplines, from contracting, project management, systems engineering, test and evaluation, science and technology. And they're just the people that oversee the 300,000 companies with all of their people, all generating data that has to be protected, shared, cleansed. It's very, very complex.
Carl?
All right. So the next question was actually directed at Robert, but we'll have Robert go first, then everyone else address it. And it speaks to the meaning of data, and what is the power of semantics in your journey as you're modernizing and dealing with this complexity. We heard the word governance a few times. So Robert, first starting with you, the power of semantics.
It is a driver in what we're doing. Let me give you a good example. My least favorite 4-letter word in the DoD that I have to work with, that means different things to different folks, is the word risk. Risk. What is risk? How do you define it? Risk means different things to different people. A program manager is going to see a risk at one way. The test engineer is going to see a risk a different thing. When I get up to the acquisition executive in a service, it means a whole different thing. And when I take it up to the DepSecDef or the SecDef, again, the meaning has changed. It's easy for us to look at stuff like cost. Well, Greg might differ a little bit in some things on getting to the meaning of cost, but if I look at a program, hey, I know how much something may cost me in terms of going and buying it on a contract. There's a number there. I can take a discrete number. But semantics really gets challenging when we're looking at governance, and we look at the work we're doing with Mark on the acquisition visibility data framework and how we look at things. Words have meaning. having the same meaning across the services is important to help us better do our analysis of said data and get to a common understanding of what we're collecting. The other part I'll say though is it's also important that even though we may say something means X, X means X, it's also important to know that at different levels, the semantics does play a part of it, and we need to know what this means to different levels. And sometimes a word can have different meanings in the appropriate construct. But I think Mark and I have fought this fight a lot in the acquisition domains about what things mean, how we define it. We have so many groups that look at our programs and our constructs to tell you if something is red, yellow, or green. Right? There's another one. Red, yellow, and green. What does it mean to be green or yellow for a program? I don't know. Well, ask me tomorrow, and I'll come up with a new definition for you.
Yes, and
Mark?
that red, amber, green, does that include an arrow for directionality in addition to just the current snapshot?
Yes.
Okay, Bill, semantics in your world.
I like the example that Robert used on risk, because even risk in training, we have qualitative risk management, quantitative risk management, the risk management framework for cyber, and semantics in data can be enormous. Just a really tiny example that I ran into when I was trying to field the Marine Corps' ERP system for supply and maintenance. You have something in the commercial world called a SKU, right? Stock keeping unit. We have something we call a national stock number. And just in data structure, there are two main parts of what we call an NSN, national the stock number. You have the first part, which we call a federal stock number, which goes to the end item that this little bolt or screw goes to. And then you have the back part that's the actual item. Well, as we move equipment in and move equipment out, the main piece of equipment it's associated with can change over time. So a lot of times in our data structure, we store those separately in different data fields. And I ran into someone that set up a small system before my ERP, the massive ERP, and they decided to store this as one string in one data field. Just the way we use dates and all the data cleansing that you have to do to get to a standard date. You think you have a lot of dates in in the civilian world. In the Department of Defense, we do crazy things like put the number first, then a 3-digit date for the month, and then sometimes 4 digits, sometimes 2 digits. We have other systems that'll put the year, have a slash, and then up to 365 days by just a number, a 3-digit number saying what day of the year it is. Semantics and the work that these gentlemen had to do in data cleansing, it's crazy. And just simple phrase used differently among a whole bunch of people.
Yes, it's very difficult to speak the same data language. That's universally. Greg, semantics in your world.
Yes, I'd say I'd sum up in the sort of 3 categories that were discussed today. One is there's sort of just meanings that we all have to say the exact same words, because if we're not saying all the exact same words, we get confused, especially at the enterprise level where we're trying to be able to tie together our military departments and our defense agencies. And so we need to be very clear on what definitions mean. I would say there's other areas where we recognize that we don't all have to be standard, but we need to be able to create that Rosetta Stone, and technology and a lot of ML and AI techniques have allowed us to be able to keep the data the way it was designed in that source system, and then to be able to translate it pretty cost effectively and pretty quickly. I think technology has been a really big enabler there. In the data shoe, usually the machines are smart enough to know what that should look like. And then there's areas of semantic that we're working on, especially around natural language processing. And so if you think of all of our contract documents, they have statements of work, they have performance work statements. How do I leverage that natural language processing technology to be able to ask questions of the data, like what does it cost to spend, how much does it cost to run artificial intelligence in the Department of Defense? What's our contract spend in that area? And artificial intelligence can have different words and meanings that we need to be able to understand that taxonomy and that semantic part of that. And machines can help us with that. So I think there's a strict definition, there's sort of the building the Rosetta Stone, and then we need machines to be able to help us to take the meaning of words and what else they can mean in synonyms to be able to get to the answers we're looking for.
All right. This is our last audience submitted question. And you each have CDO organizations. Have your organizations, your CDOs, data management groups, have they built enterprise common data services that are leveraged very highly across? For example, data quality platform, data lineage, and I guess we could add to that business glossaries. But can you share your experiences with developing these enterprise common data services?
Let me take a stab at that first. So I saw Michael Conlon on one of the videos. He was the first CDO in DoD, really incredible leader there. Dave Spurk, who's the current DoD CDO, an incredible friend, colleague. We're sort of, in essence, in a lot of respects, Dave Spurk's execution arm. And so things like the data catalog, the lineage, the glossaries, the categorization of business questions, the data acquisition. It's a partnership between CDO and my office. We just recently, Dave has reached a couple policies out there that have federated data catalog, where our data catalog will be the enterprise data catalog within Advana, that data management analytics environment. And so we work extremely closely with the CDO. And I think the value proposition there is you want to make sure data management is in context of business value. So by us being so closely aligned between the CFO and the CDO, we're ensuring that what both of us are doing is making data turn into decision advantage. So it's been a really good partnership for us.
Yeah, and I'll follow up, on that from the Navy side, as we've established, our CDO and our data structure and our data stewards, we've really started turning the tide and working very closely with OSD in transforming our data just to that, something that's usable, that actually supports decision making. There's a lot of a journey left to go on that. But we similar to what is happening in the CFO side and the comptroller side on OSD, we are definitely starting to get at that in the Navy across our areas. I would say our business financial side is probably the furthest ahead. Our acquisition side, as we are transitioning our systems and starting to build them on the back end to share and be agnostic to our data so that it can be used, is so transformative in how we're going to start making decisions. But the other part of that I'll put out there, where Greg is focusing on the execution side of the DoDO, I have the benefit to be in some of that role and working with ours. But on the other side, I get to work with with Mark, for instance, and the other services on building that data quality, building our data dictionary, our data governance, and the acquisition side across what we've changed the way we've done acquisition in the department to move into the acquisition visibility, adaptive acquisition framework. So a lot of goodness is happening there, and so we are.
I just want to point out that, I've been in this business, I'm going on my 4th decade now, not to admit how old I am, but I could not have imagined culturally what these gentlemen are doing today. And as a researcher who loves data to do studies, what's available through the Advana system that Greg is responsible for, and Robert has done a lot of work putting the Navy's information into the acquisition system there, and Mark, it's astounding for me from where we came. I remember the old days where, a little history lesson here. We didn't always have a Department of Defense. We used to have a Department of War, which was the Army, and a Department of the Navy. And when they created this Department of Defense and came up with an Army and an Air Force, the naval services, the Navy and Marine Corps, didn't really trust those others to share data with them. No. We'll just get underway in our ships and go to the sands of Iwo Jima and leave us alone. It's amazing the collaboration that's happened and how much they've done in data governance. I'm just excited to where we're going to go in the future.
All right. Well, Mark, would you like to say a few words in closing? We don't have any further audience questions at this time.
There's so much. I want to go back to the original question about a complex organization and why thematically we wrote it up the way we did and proposed it the way we did. You have three great leaders and then me on this conversation. We rise and fall under the flag of freedom, and the Department of Defense is in charge of protecting those freedoms. In that role, none of us, no matter how important we think we are or not, we contribute. We're all a piece of the big puzzle, so supporting our soldiers, sailors, and airmen. And when we think about data and we think about mission, it was alluded to in this conversation that it is under that flag of freedom that we all serve. And we're all bit part pieces. And the importance of where we're trying to change. Our adversaries are very rapid these days. We need to be good stewards of taxpayers' dollars. We need to ensure the safety of our soldiers, sailors, and merchant marines, and move on through that. It is just profound, and I am very grateful that we participate associated with this as we go forward. And it is no small matter. The data is resoundingly complex, and I hope the audience takes that away, that the multitude of missions that we have and the things that we do. I am very grateful for the camaraderie, the colleague, the sharing. It happens not because of the organization, but I think one of the strong foundations that you have participants, those are on the panel today, to think about a new future and are willing to embrace that and lead those efforts as best they can from whatever foxhole they have. So given that there's no questions, I could tease you that I'll talk deeply about the acquisition contribution tomorrow morning. And we are a bit part piece of Ivana and the CFO in our contributions to the missions. And, I'd like to thank the audience. And Carl, I'd like to thank you. You did a great job. And thank you for your service in the Air Force here. I just wish we were all together. So after this conversation, we could have the extreme value add conversation of the hallway, but things are what they are. So thank you. Carl, over to you.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Mark, and all of our panelists and our audience for tuning in today. Again, this session and all the others are recorded and will be made available after the symposium. This concludes our session.